Mr. Chance Gardner. He was walking, talking. He was a pretty cute little guy. Gary and Gail had moved up to Seattle, and the four of us were together all the time. And so Chance was the focus of a lot of our activity and discussion. He's right in the middle of it. And what were we discussing back then? Well, remember, Albert had his job at Boeing. Gary had quit his job at Boeing because he had to work Saturdays at Boeing. And we were Adventist. We were very excited about being Adventist. As a matter of fact, we poured everything that we could of what we knew, biblically ignorant as we were. We poured all that stuff into Chance's head. And I read it. We had one of the book series that Gary sold as a call porter, as a book salesman, was Uncle Arthur's Bedtime Stories, which was the Adventist version of my book house for kids, children's stories. And it was all about people obeying God. And there was one story about a man smoking cigarettes, and his little boy was so sad to see his father smoking cigarettes that he cried and cried and cried, and it was just it was quite the struggle. But the spiritual struggle ended with his father stopping smoking cigarettes. That's the story. Chance was extremely impressed by that. He was less than 2, maybe he was 2 years old. He was very impressed by the pictures. And so one day we took him he had to go with me to the doctor. I had to go to the doctor's office for some checkup. Artist was with us. She came up as often as she could. She missed us all. Anyway, she went with us, and she was sitting in the doctor's waiting room with Chance, waiting for me to come out. And Chance noticed someone light up a cigarette. It's hard to think of that now because smoking's been banned for so long and inside public places. But nonetheless, this guy lit up a cigarette, and Artist was embarrassed when Chance confronted the man with religious zeal and told him that he's making Jesus sad every time he lights a cigarette. The guy put his cigarette out. But she was quite impressed with how well that we had indoctrinated Chance into Adventist doctrine at age 2. And we did. We poured it all into his head. There was this wooden rocking horse. We lived in an apartment. Somebody put a wooden rocking horse out on the lawn where their kids could play with it. But it really blocked our access from coming from our apartment. So when Gary came to and from with Gail, sometimes their access got blocked by the rocking horse. So my brother said, "That damn rocking horse," and Chance heard him. And from then on, Chance called it that. There's that damn rocking horse. When are they going to move that? And we realized then that he just absorbed a little too much. He was too zealous of a disciple of Adventism that early. But we taught him the Pledge of Allegiance. We taught him prayers. We taught him songs. So he was quite the little star at the Adventist potlucks on Saturday. So anyway, that's how Chance was, and that's how he was growing up. And very bright little guy, very cute little guy. And Gary did, as I mentioned, he got his call porter job. They were starving to death. But all of us were. Albert, by then, had gotten his job. Albert had left Boeing because as an Adventist, he was, as we discussed, he was eligible for promotion or employment within the Seventh-day Adventist-owned Harris Pine Mills. And so that's what was going on there in Seattle, and I've covered that, and I covered also Albert's meteoric rise in Adventist management, and I told you what the was very necessary to be. The quality was to go into management. You didn't have to have any experience or college, but you'd have to be Adventist. So in due time, Law was born. Chance was absolutely thrilled with Law, just loved him. And we covered that also, that he was promoted, so we moved to Pendleton, Oregon. Now the move to Pendleton, I felt a lot better about going to Pendleton. I myself, inside of my heart, I felt better about going to Pendleton. Pendleton was a smaller town, 15,000 people. This was I think we went there in 71. To this day, I think it's 15,000 people. It's a charming little place, so it was just basic flatlands. There wasn't a lot of trees. There wasn't the beautiful mountains and rivers that we had in Seattle, but it was, in its way, it was just beautiful. And we moved there just maybe a week or two before Seddon was born. And Seddon was born, and I wanted to name him, I was going to name him Spain. Perfectly normal name, right? Albert wanted to name him Seddon. Why? Because he wanted him to be a football player, and he wanted, when he ran out on the field, to the announcer to say Seddon Gardner, and you get the allusion to his lightning quick Seddon Gardner getting out there and running around the football field. So we named him Seddon Spain, which was, I guess that was remarkable to some people. For instance, Adventist people in our church in Pendleton. They thought it was very strange. One woman said that she thought I didn't love my children to name them such names. But anyway, it was we just wanted to name him unusual names. So anyway, his name is Seddon Spain. He's lived with it for 52 years. He's perfectly okay. He's healthy. There's not a thing nothing that he's. Well, I know some people have talked to him about his name and made remarks, but generally speaking, I think he's okay. He's okay with it. He never went to using the name Spain. We just never got around to using that too much. So Seddon it was, and Seddon was just adorable. And I think I mentioned that Law particularly loved him because he was like a toy to Law. He was like a little baby toy. Seddon was just maybe, I'd been home from the hospital maybe a day or two, and I gave Seddon his first bath in the sink and in his little tub. And Law, I kept warning Law, 3-year-old Law, to stand back. You know what happens when you put a little baby boy into a warm bath. So Law was standing there with his mouth open, watching Seddon. I kept telling him to get back. Oh, you should have seen his face. You should have seen his face when that little fountain went right into his mouth. Oh, he was mad. He was mad. He was mad at Seddon. This little tiny newborn baby. Law was mad. And he was embarrassed. And Chance laughed and laughed. And Law was very embarrassed about that. But nonetheless, he loved Seddon. And I already told you about that he used his light to sneak and pinch Seddon. But generally speaking, Law watched over Seddon pretty good. Or not, he wasn't his babysitter or anything, but he did play with him. And he did pay attention to him from the first. Law was a funny little guy, though. Unlike Chance. Chance was more sociable than Law. Law, by the time he was 3 years old, he would go and he'd come in and get a chair from the living room, and he'd go take his chair and go sit out on the lawn, and then he'd watch the guy next door mow his lawn. And finally, the guy next door came over and asked us not to let him do that because it made him nervous. And Law had this little tiny tricycle, a big wheel, that's what it was called, a big wheel. And we were up on a hill, near as a road down here, and Law got on his big wheel every day, and he went like a bat out of hell down that hill, and it scared me to death. I think I finally had to put that big wheel somewhere so he wouldn't do that, but he was a daring little guy. Another thing he did, he had a little neighborhood gang, I think I told you that. One of his friends was named Miles, if I remember it. Miles was probably 2 years older than Law. But Miles liked something about his free spirit, I suspect. Anyway, Miles taught Law, and they both did this, to trap grasshoppers and pull their back legs off and eat them. And Law told me how good they were, and I was absolutely appalled. I absolutely sick to my stomach, appalled. But he kept that up. I couldn't really stop him. Later on, he denied it. He denied it when he was a few years old. He realized it was pretty disgusting. And then this one time, our landlord. Our landlord, his name was Steve, and they owned a lot of property around there. This family, and Steve is the one who took care of the property if something went wrong. We were in a mobile home then renting, and something went wrong with the furnace, the heater, and I said that lazy bum Steve isn't gonna ever fix it. I made a huge mistake, because a few days later I walked into the house and I was putting groceries away, and Steve was there and he was working on the furnace. And Law said, "Look, Mom, Steve isn't a lazy bum. He's here to fix the furnace." Luckily, Steve thought that was hilariously funny. But of course, he got a very different view of my personality at that time. So Law, you had to be careful around Law. You had to watch him, you had to be careful around him. And I got to tell you, I thought this was adorable. Albert thought it was weird. We got this. We moved away from there very, very soon. It was too small for us with 3 boys. We were renting this house across from the park. And boy, Law loved it there. He had a lot of friends there. But he was 4 maybe. Maybe he was 5, I don't know. But anyway, one day, we used to get magazines. They had magazine subscription to Time or Life back then. On the front cover was a thing about Disneyland. And so on that cover, it was Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse were standing in front, and the whole full picture of them standing there. They were obviously, character actors in Disneyland, dressed up like Minnie and Mickey Mouse. And Law was enthralled with it. He kept looking at that. He took the magazine into his bedroom. He just carried it around. And I said, "Why are you doing that?" And he said, I love Minnie Mouse. I love her. Look at her legs. He loved her because of her legs. So he told me once he was going to run away and marry Minnie Mouse. I mean, who forms attachments with a character on a magazine cover? So I thought that was he had a different brain, and it was kind of ingenious of him, albeit it was a mouse. And he got over that fairly quickly. But funny little guy. From the beginning, he saw things differently than other people, had a very different perspective. And he was a loner. He was going to make up his own mind about things. One time, we had this cat. I don't even know what the name of it was, but he was a mean little guy. It was a mean cat. None of us liked him. But, because the cat kind of terrorized the kids. So one day, I opened the closet. It was the linen closet when I was going to put some sheets and stuff away. So you reach up here. So anyway, I opened the closet. No, I might have heard something inside the closet too. You go in to put stuff in there, open the door, and this cat just wrapped up like a mummy, right? He's wrapped up yarn all around him. Somebody took lots of time to put this yarn all around him, just like this. Fell out. He fell out. He couldn't even land on his feet. He fell out like a rock. And I knew who did it, of course, because Law didn't like him. So Law tied him up, put him up in the closet. Anyway, it didn't help. The cat still didn't like us. I think we got rid of that cat. That was a mean little guy. But Law had friends there. Kid next door was named Joe. It was Joel. Can't remember the last name, but he knew Joel forever. Everybody knew Joel and his family. And Joel was about a year or two older than Law. Law by then was, I think Law was 4. And he was running around with Joel, and Gary would get real mad at Joel. He'd get mad at him and throw stuff at him. And they'd play out in the yard. And Joel was older than him, and he'd just get real mad at him. And I told Gary came up for a visit. And I told Gary that they got in a fight. Law got in a fist fight with him. So when Law came in, Gary started teasing him about Joel. He said, you better run away from Joel because he's a big shot and you're not, you're just a little guy. And Gary was just baiting him, and he took the bait, and he was just so mad. And finally, for some reason, I know what it was. Law had called Joel a pig pig. And I got mad at Law, and so Law was in trouble. So Gary comes and he hears that. And he said, Law, are you a pig pig? Law turned red. He got so mad. He was so mad at Gary. He was furious. And he denied it that he was a pig pig. And he got so mad, he ran out of the house. I remember that. It was okay for him to call people names, like pig pig. It was a horrible name, apparently, because he didn't want to be called it. So that's what I remember about Law. Law had, he'd get right in the mix. If there was a neighborhood game, he would be right in the mix, stirring things up. And Chance wasn't really like that. Chance would play with me, not on that level. Not on the level of really combat. Was never on that level for Chance. But Law right away started socializing. Right away gotten just in that mix where if there was going to be trouble, it was probably Law starting it. He was real mad at Gary for a long time. Every time Gary saw him after that, he'd come and visit at least once a year, and he'd wait till Law was always glad to see him because Law loved Gary. But at the right moment, Gary would call him a pig pig, send Law into a big hysteria. Really mad, funny. At that time, Albert was working at Harris Pine Mills. Now, Harris Pine Mills in Pendleton was headquarters. And Albert was a safety officer. He was designated as a safety officer. And that was a time when the EPA started having, federal EPA, started putting a lot of requirements on industrial companies about their, to make sure that their workers were in safe environments. So naturally, Harris Pine Mills, because of the fact that they had dealt with all these chemicals and paint and everything, and also underage employees, they had to be over than 16, but not older than 18. Because of that, they created a position for Albert to be the contact with the EPA, the industrial contact. I forgot the title of the position, but beyond that, he was the safety man. And those positions, they combined together and gave Albert that position. Albert knew nothing about it, but he did, that was when he started becoming career-minded, and he did a lot of studying, and he traveled a lot. He had to travel to these seminars, he had to travel to, within the state of Oregon, and then, and to the branches were all over the United States. He traveled a lot, and he liked it. He liked being, of course he did. It was a wonderful foot in the door in a large company in 26 branches, and he got to travel. He was in management, and that was probably a pretty good career ladder. So he was very he was very concerned about his image. He started becoming concerned about his and his family's image. And so we would always, there's only one Seventh-day Adventist church in Pendleton. Because we went to Harris Pine Mills, because he was in management, we had to be Adventist, and we had to be presentable Adventists. So we were. We were. I made them go to. We went to Sabbath school. We went to Sabbath school or to church every Saturday, because it was a mark of the beast within Adventism. If you went to church on Sunday, that's the mark of the Catholic Church, which is the mark of the beast. In any event, so we went to church every Saturday. I dressed them up in their little polyester suits. They were so popular, and Chance never liked it. Never liked it. Law always saw the hypocrisy from the moment he went into Adventist Sabbath school. He was he would not cooperate if he thought something was amiss or something didn't make sense. In that period, Albert was very, very busy learning this new position and creating this new position, really learning it, and the boys were little, and so he couldn't spend a lot of time with them. Of course he did spend time with them. What did he do? Sudden hated it. Sudden hates it, even the mention of it to this day. I think we took a lot on Saturdays and Sundays. We took lots of rides all over. We went all over Eastern Oregon in the car. It was a small car. They were always in the back seat and they were always fighting. So Sudden didn't like it, and Sudden got the raw end of the stick. Believe me, between all three of those boys. But we went to a lot of places, and we saw a lot of things and did a lot of things. We'd go over to Hat Rock State Park over by the Columbia River, and it was a lot of fun. Deviating away from Albert for a few minutes, because that was really his career, and his mother was so proud of him. I think I need to go back. Did I? Artisan Bob saw Albert identified some property around this time, that when we were living in that rented house. Albert identified some property that was about 7 miles out of Pendleton, and it was 5 acre lots out in the wheat fields. You could look at the distant mountains. At the time, I didn't think it was pretty. Now I realize it was love. It was beautiful. So I told Artisan Bob about it, and they wanted to move up very badly. So they bought one of the lots for themselves, 5 acres. They bought 7.5 acres actually, because they decided they were going to put alfalfa in some of the acreage. And then they bought us 5 acres, and it was wonderful. And all we had to do was made the most sense to put a mobile home there, and it was the most cost effective because Albert wasn't making much money and I wasn't working. And so we bought this mobile home. It was actually quite nice. It was a manufactured home. It was very nice, brand new, big. It was big enough. They only had 2 bedrooms, but the kids were little then. So we had the 5 acres. We moved out there, and that's where the kids grew up. We stayed at that place for 11 years. That's where the kids grew up. We had, in the course of those 11 years, we had many, many dogs. They had many, many adventures. Albert planted a huge football field-sized lawn there that the boys were on a lot. They were out there when they were older playing football or whatever else. And we always had dogs around. As a matter of fact, I remember Puppy, our first dog, her name was really, what the heck was her name? My goodness. Son will have to fill that in. We called her Puppy anyway. Puppy, we went to the library one night. We took the kids to the library like we did when they were little. And there were some little dogs that they were giving away. So we got her, and we got her at the library, so we named her Library, but nobody liked that, so we just called her Puppy. Puppy loved the kids naturally. She was only about 2 months old when we got her. She followed them around everywhere, and Sudden was just learning to walk. And so Puppy would go and sit on him. She'd knock him down and sit on him. One time he said, "Mommy, I saw her bottom." He didn't like it. She'd sit on him. And Law loved it. Law loved it, though. And Chad thought it was funny too, but that dog was a sweet, sweet animal. We had her all the time we were there, which we were there for 11 years. Puppy became such a part of our lives that um, she actually she had a lot of litters. Puppy did over the years. We had her for about 12 years. And she was always getting pregnant, always having litters. And we didn't, she was out, we had all this land, what did we care? So she had litters. And then when they were born, a lot of them were really, really cute, because she was cute. Anyway, when they were born, when they got to be 6 weeks old, then we would have, now the boys were older then, Law was maybe 10, or Sutton was 7. So we'd have them go down to take the dogs in a box, puppies in a box, go down to Payless, and sometimes they'd sell them. Mostly they gave them away for free. And we'd leave the boys there, we'd drop the boys there for maybe 2 hours and then they'd have the puppies were gone. And they'd have a big litters. And people accused us of populating Pendleton with all these puppies, because they're all over. I mean, there were a lot of her puppies all over the place. I mean, there was like five litters. So that was a lot of dogs. But anyway, that was their job. One day I remember, well, I couldn't go outside. I remember that. I had to be real careful to sneak outside when I wanted to do anything, because there'd be like, turn around. If I walk along the grass, to go water the trees, I'd turn around, there'd be like this herd of puppies, like even up to 9 puppies running after me, a little army of puppies following me wherever I went. It was very cute. One time remember Sherry and I were sitting out there drinking lemonade in the summertime, and I was like sitting in the lounge chair, and I heard a plop in my lemonade glass, and I looked up, and Osmeroid, one of our dogs, I don't know why we named him that, he was a little puppy, but Osmeroid had dropped a little, I think it was a little mouse or a rat, into my lemonade as a wonderful gift. And he was sitting there wagging his tail, look at me, waiting for my reaction. But anyway, that was sort of what life was like. They were having all these dogs. There was just lots of dogs. Boys always loved dogs. So I got ahead of myself there, but anyway, moving out there was just wonderful for the kids, for Albert, for me. It was nice to live out 7 miles from town. They had so much to do out there from the time when they were old enough. They'd walk down to the reservoir. The reservoir, I think they probably had to walk about 3/4 of a mile to get down to the reservoir. And they went down there a lot. Albert would go with them sometimes. At one point he bought a raft so they could go down there and raft on the reservoir. And that was fun for them. They'd go down there when they were a little older and fish. And one day, and I didn't mention that even though these were 5-acre lots and we were a ways away from our neighbors, there was all kinds of little kids down there, all kinds of kids. And Law and Sutton and Chance's cousins were down there. They lived behind Artist. She lived about 1/4 of a mile down the road. Then Richard and Keith lived behind her, and there was lots of kids there. They had cousins. My mother was there. She lived in town. My sister Alyssa were there, and Mel. Sherry was with Mel then, which I'll mention later. And then Billy had Cable and Annie in town. So they had lots of cousins and grandmothers and relatives all over the place. And there was lots of kids out there to play with. So you'd see a gang of kids. Law was certainly in the gang. He was a big part of. He's an active person, so he was a big part of organizing the gang. And he liked to go fishing, and it's funny about him fishing because I'm the one who teased him. He was 10 years old. He was usually very active laying outside. During one summer, I went into the living room and I found him. He was laying on the couch reading this book, Let's Fish. And I really teased him mercilessly about it. And I said, I'm real glad, something like, I'm real glad you're reading, but I wish it was some classic or something else that's really educational. But what are you reading, Law? Let's Fish. So he was real mad. He got real mad. I was just teasing him, but he got mad. Anyway, they did go fishing. And he liked to fish. And one day I looked up, down there, here it comes down the road, there was 5 of them. And they had, you know how much, they had 100 fish. Only, I'm pretty close to 100 fish, I think. Maybe I could be wrong, and maybe it's expanded by time, but even 50 fish. Anyway, a huge, enormous amount of fish. And none of them knew how to clean fish. I didn't know how to clean fish. I wasn't gonna clean fish, even if I knew how. And stinky old smelly fish. They were so proud of themselves, Little tiny ones like this, they're a little bit bigger, but so tiny that you wouldn't want to bother with them. But they brought them all home, all these fish. So you know what happened with these fish? They were all over the yard. We had fish all over the yard. They didn't do anything with them. They took them off the hooks. They let them go all over the yard. All the dogs got these fish. For a long time, there was dead fish all over the yards. And let's see what else. I was going to tell you one other thing. Yeah, so Puppy had her first litter, and I'll tell you about when she had her first litter, because the kids by then were probably, Sudden was probably about 3, and Law was 6, Chance was 9, and she had her first litter, and they died. She had 9 of them, and they all died, and there was 2 left, and it was winter. There was snow on the ground, and as they died, Albert would go and bury them out in the yard, different places. So they got down to 2 left, and then they both died too. It was very sad because Albert took them out and buried them, and that dog, when she lost her last one, she zoned out. She went back and forth the length of the house. She just did that for maybe about, I would say, 5 hours, just walking back and forth. It was real sad to see her because she was just in terrible grief. And so what she used to do, after a few days, what she used to do is she'd go out there, she'd find these little dogs, these little puppies that were buried, and she'd bring them back in. And she kept doing it. Albert kept reburying them. And after a while, it was like 2 or 3 weeks. She didn't even know, they weren't recognizable anymore. They were rotting, right? And I remember getting ready for work one day. And she comes in and flops this thing. She didn't even know what it was then. She was over her grief. So what was she doing? She brings this half-rotted clump of mud, puts it on my bed. So that was the only time she did that, though. In due time, she had many, many litters. And I don't know why that happened, why they all died, except that she was only 6 months old. She was just too young to have them. But we had some precious dogs from Puppy. Puppy was the mother of Beast. Yeah, Beast. Yeah. Anyway, Beast was his father was a dog next door who was a big, huge dog. That dog next door was named Justice. He was a big black, I forgot what kind of dog he was. Big, huge dog, maybe over 100 pounds. And Beast came from him, and we loved Beast. Beast was a huge black dog too, and when he walked, he had curly hair on his bottom and just regular long hair and ears in front. And when he walked, the back of him went one way and the front of him went the other. We all loved Beast. He was a very gentle but scary looking dog. But that is all I'll say about the dogs. But that was generally, as the boys grew older and they had their bikes, and in time they got a mini bike. There was a little neighborhood gang there, and they were pretty much free to do anything they wanted to do. They'd go down to Artis's a lot, Artis and Bob's, which was just down the road, and Artis and Bob were so good to them. They adored them, and likewise with the kids. And their place was a nice big place too. So Bob's the one who bought him the mini bike, as a matter of fact. So they took, as they got older, they took that mini bike all over the place. Had lots of good accidents on that mini bike out in the fields. They started school. Chance, why did we do this? We put Chance into Adventist school. It's Harris Junior Academy. Why? Because the only reason I know is because we were Adventist. It was expected of us, and especially since he was in management. So we put him in Harris Junior Academy, and he was he did okay. Chance did all right. It was kind of hard on Chance. I think it was hard on Chance to put him in there, to tell you the truth. It just wasn't like normal school. But anyway, Law, on the other hand, I have this memory of Law. Law got onto the school. It was the first day of school. He was 5, I guess. He was going to go to kindergarten, maybe 4 or 5. Going to go to kindergarten, and he had to take a special bus, and they bused them out. Instead of it being in this Pendleton school district, they bused them out to Adams, to this big old 100-year-old school. It was specifically for kindergarten, for that whole. For all of Pendleton and all of the surrounding areas. It was a kindergarten school that they decided they were going to have, school district. And I remember, so we had gone out to look at the school out in Adams. He knew what it was. He was 4. That's how old he was. He was 4. And he didn't say much about it, but I walked him to the bus stop that day. He was the only one on the bus. We knew that. But he knew the bus driver. It was Mrs. Pflugrad, which the Pflugrads lived down the road. Kids used to love that name. They loved to make strange words out of that name. But Mrs. Pflugrad, he knew her. He didn't like her, but he knew her. And so he didn't say, I don't want to go or anything. He didn't. But he didn't act happy or excited. But I remember he turned and he got up on the bus. He walked up the stairs of the bus, and he sat on the first seat behind Mrs. Pflugrad. So I looked at him I stood there and I waved, and she turned the bus around. And then he looked at me, and I could see a tear flood going down his face. Little kid, 4 years old. He did never say anything. Usually he'd say, Mommy, I don't want to go, or whatever. But he didn't. He just went. But anyway, he liked it. Right away, he liked it. Right away, he had a really good friend, and her name was something crazy, Kangaroo. She told him her name was Kangaroo. So he came home, and I was asking him, what'd you do? Well, me and my friend Kangaroo, we did this. And I said, what? What's her name? Her name's Kangaroo. I don't think he questioned her name for a long time till they probably started calling her a real name. And he caught on, but for a while, he liked old Kangaroo. He liked the name. And he did fine. He socialized, and he integrated, and he did fine. And Chance did okay at Harris Junior Academy. It was expensive to put him in at Harris Junior Academy. So when it came around for Law to go to first grade, we never did. Wait a minute, we did put Law in there for a year or two, come to think of it, because he had a teacher, and the teacher's name was Mrs. Bork. Mrs. Bork was the wife of the principal, who was Mr. Bork, right? Of course, the whole staff at the school were all Adventists that we knew. We went to church with. Many of them had spouses working at Harris Pine Mills. it was a very integrated society. Harris and Harris Pine Mills and Harris Junior Academy and the Adventist Church. So anyway, Law didn't like her. He didn't. He had some friends there, but he didn't like his teacher, and so he made up this little poem that he loved, and he loved telling his friends. So everybody liked his lot, and it was Mrs. Bork eats pork with a fork. Now the reason that was so scandalous was because it was a deadly sin to eat pork within Seventh-day Adventist theology. So that was a terrible. I think she actually even got mad at him for making that up and telling people Mrs. Borg eat pork with a fork. It was very daring for him to do. He was only there for. He didn't stay at Harris Junior Academy, and I never put Seddon in Harris Junior Academy. First of all, we couldn't afford to put 3 kids in an academy, but Law just, he wanted to go to public school, so it was not a big deal to us. So he started. I think maybe 2nd grade or so. He started going to. He started going to a public school because he was embarrassed. He was embarrassed to get to when the public school kids would come onto the bus after the Harris Junior Academy kids loaded up the bus. Then they'd stop at public school, and the public school kids would get on the bus too, and they started calling the kids from Harris Junior Academy peanut eaters because many of them are vegetarian Adventists. They're because of Ellen White's doctrines about eating meat. Absolutely couldn't eat meat. Absolutely not. Couldn't eat fish, shellfish. Most fish you couldn't eat. You could eat vegetarian stuff and the stuff that the Adventist. There was an Adventist company called Loma Linda and Worthington Foods, and they sold artificial soybean meat. You could eat that. So anyway, nonetheless, they were called peanut eaters, and the kids from the public school always was laughing and making fun of them and calling them peanut eaters. And Law was very embarrassed about it. He didn't like it at all, and he wasn't big enough to fight with them. He kept telling me that someday he was going to be really, really big and tall, but right then he wasn't big enough to fight with them. He was just embarrassed, humiliated. So we didn't, for that and other reasons. I didn't, it wasn't necessary to put him in Harris Junior Academy. So we didn't put him in there again. And he went to public school, and Sudden went to public school always. So Law went to public school then. Now Sudden was so cute, and he wasn't like Law. Sudden was more of a quiet kid. But he was always he tagged along with them. The 3 of them were their own gang, and they could do what they just were so busy all day long. And he just wanted, he was going to do what they wanted to do. I remember one time, I've told you this story before, it was just so funny. So it was just so much like the kids. Albert and I got a babysitter, and we were going to go to the movies. And this young girl who lived down the street she was a teenager. She came to babysit them. Sudden was about 3 or 4. That would put Law at 7, Chance at 10. But I think they were a little younger than that. All of them. Maybe Sudden was about 3 and 6 and 9. That's what it was. Babysitter came, and I told her everything, and they knew they were supposed to behave. And so we went to the movies. And when we came home, we drove up. We saw Sudden flying out the window of his bedroom, flying out. And I knew what happened. They had a bunk bed in their bedroom, and Sudden was on the top of the bunk, and he flew off the window, which was very unsafe. I think he landed on the bikes, if I'm not mistaken. That's where they parked their bikes, and it hurt him. So I went in there, and she was sitting on the couch watching TV, and she says, "Oh, hi, the boys are fine, just no problems at all." I told her, well, they were playing up on the bunk bed, and Sudden flew off. So, but that was not out of the ordinary at all. They would do things like that all the time, and they were I would think it's safe to say that Chance and Law, not so much Chance, but Law was very rather careless with Sudden's well-being. And you've heard that there's one time when how did this happen? I don't know how it happened, but they were a little older. Maybe they were about, maybe Sid was about 8, maybe 7. I'm not sure how old he was when he they got to the door. They were fighting at the door or something, and Sudden hurt his arm badly, and he started crying. Law told him to stop it, but he came and told me, and he said he thought he broke his arm, and I didn't think he broke his arm. It didn't look broken. Albert said it was just strained or whatever, but Law kept telling him to shut up. So he didn't say much about it, but it hurt him all night long. So when we took him to the doctor, it was broken. There was a break. And so Law was pretty mad about that. He was mad because he got in trouble. And then, so they put a cast on Sudden, and Sudden had to wear this cast. But the very day he got that cast taken off, same thing. I think it was a fight or something, him and Law, and he broke it. I believe that's how it was. And Law just was furious and said he wasn't going to let him go in and tell me that it hurt. He broke it until they made up some story that he had hurt it accidentally or something. So finally Law let him come in and tell me. But Sudden wasn't allowed to tell me until he consented to this story. We knew right away what happened. So that wasn't out of the ordinary, living with the kids there like that. Sudden he never did go to Harris Junior Academy. He was always Law was the one who was pretty kind of hard to keep a track of, but they were always together. They were usually always together. I started work. I think Sudden was 3 or 4. Couldn't really, as much as Albert, he had a nice job, but it wasn't much money. So I started work, and I started working in the office, and so I'd work every day. So we would drop them at the babysitters. And Marilyn Ringering was the babysitter's name. She was an Adventist when we were from church. She had ran a daycare there at her house, and that was probably they usually had about 5 or 6 kids besides Chance or Sudden-in-law. Chance was older and he didn't have to go. So that was a part of their lives. And they'd go there, and that was and they'd go to school, and then they'd come home and go to Marilyn's house, and then we'd pick them up at 5 o'clock, I think. That was our schedule in our lives for a long time. This would be our schedule then for a week. We go on Saturdays. It was the 7th day of the week. So Friday night, when we got off early from Harris Pine Mills for to get ready for Sabbath, right? So we get off at like an hour before the sunset. We were able to get off. We go home and we make sure that we had. Usually, we were supposed to get our Saturday meal ready before. I mean, that was customary what people did, and that's why you got off early so you could prepare for Sabbath. So I did that somewhat, and I'd clean up the house, and I'd cook dinner enough for the next day on Friday night, and then we turn off the TV right away. They hated it. As soon as the sun went down, we turned off the TV. They hated it. And so they were very inventive about the things that they did, though. Inside of that little mobile home, there wasn't a lot of movement they could do, but they were busy every minute. And I tried on Friday nights, and it was I liked it. They never did. I liked it because the TV was off and I could read them stories. And sometimes they liked them, and a lot of times they didn't. But on nights when it was snowing outside, we had the fire going on inside, and it was just cold and windy and black out there because there was no street lamps or anything out there. It was just out in the country. on those nights we'd sit there and I'd read to him and we'd have stuff to eat and everything, and it was a lovely time. It was, I recognized then, even though I didn't incidentally, as an Adventist, recognize God's blessings in our life at all. As a matter of fact, by then, I taught the kids just to kind of laugh at it and just, go through the motions and, do it because Albert wanted us to be good Adventists. He believed in Adventism. By that time, I was sort of realizing it wasn't really what it should be, and I just didn't want to participate in it anymore. But of course, we were tied in to that Adventist culture by then, and but the kids, I'm sorry that I didn't create in them the kind of discipline and faithfulness to God, or to the Lord, that is required in a real relationship with God. But I didn't know it. I didn't have a relationship with God. I had a relationship with the Adventist Church. So did Albert. We read their stupid Ellen White stuff and believed it. And Gary would come up from Las Vegas every once in a while, and him and Albert would get in arguments about it. Well, good-natured arguments. They would end up laughing, but kids loved to listen to this stuff because Albert was going to make those kids Adventist. He was going to make them Adventist. He believed that stuff. He believed Adventism. Gary came out. Gary would say, tell him that it wasn't biblical. Gary had just, studied and realized it was Adventism was as far from the Bible as was, sports or something like that. It just wasn't. It wasn't a part of biblical truth. I didn't care. I didn't even care then. But I didn't want them to be bullied into being Adventists. And so they loved it when Gary came up and Gary argued with Albert. Albert was her authority figure, and they loved it when Gary would point out what was wrong with Adventism. And Law was a great one for detecting hypocrisy. By the time he was 7 or 8, he was the best arguer in the world, thanks to his relationship with the artist who taught him to be an arguer. And so they loved Gary and Albert to argue, and they loved it when Albert had this big decorative sword, right by the fireplace, and Gary got real mad at him, or Albert got mad at Gary. Gary never got mad; he was just laughing. I remember Gary grabbed the sword, and the boys loved it. They loved it. Gary grabbed the sword and he said he was going to kill him unless he renounced Adventism. Oh my goodness, they loved that. They loved it. I think Albert was probably just mad. But again, Albert, it was rare that we had Gary up there. He was working back in Las Vegas. He was married again to, who was he married to? My goodness, let's see. Jody. He was married to Jody. So we saw him very little. But when he came, we just loved it. And the boys loved it. And Sherry, of course, loved it. Sherry and Mom and Billy were all there, and they loved having Gary there. So Mom was there, lived in town, and a lot of times Alyssa stayed with Mom because Sherry was working nights. So Alyssa was with Mom a great deal. Mom lived in town. A lot of times Alyssa was the same age as Seddon. And so they were buddies, and Alyssa would come out a lot. Mom would bring Alyssa out every Sunday, as a matter of fact. Billy would come out with his kids, and Jeannie and Cable and Annie, and we'd all get together at our house many times, many Sundays, and have Sunday dinner. And we had Christmas together. They'd come out to my house and we'd have Christmas together. And so it was very nice. And we would go places like, there was one time when Mom lived down, Mom lived close to the old Safeway in Pendleton in an old house. And Alyssa was there. She was 3 years old. And her and Seddon we were getting ready to go we were all going on a trip. It was about 30 miles to a park over there by McNary Park by the river. And we noticed Sherry or Alyssa and Sutton weren't there. And so we went in the garage and they were playing with matches. And 3-year-olds, they were 3 years old playing with matches. They got big, fat, big spankings. And they were just scared to death, both of them. So we knew even by then we had to keep our eyes on them. So we got together a lot when all the kids were young. And happily, that time I was working, and I worked for several years then. And the boys were growing up, and Albert had his job, and he kept advancing in the job and kept getting more responsibility because, again, he was an Adventist. And he did a good job. I'm sure he did a good job. We did go to church once a week. However, by the time that the boys were, I would say by the time Law was 9, Seddon was 6, Chance was 12, they just didn't want to go. And I didn't want to go. No, I had to go because I was working there. But we skipped out many, many times. On Saturdays, we usually take drives around the countryside. But we didn't. We gradually we got away from going to church. Now we were still in that Adventist world because we worked there, but they were growing up and they just didn't like it. And I did not want to make them grow up as Adventists. Now Albert did, but he could see the flaw by then. You know, he could see the flaws. Gary and Jody moved up with Jody's 4 kids. They decided they were going to move up. Gary was going to quit dealing. They were going to move up there. They rented a place right next to ours. It was 5 acres, but it was, it wasn't a very long walk to get to their house. And they were there for a while. And that was really nice to have them there. So we all get together on Sundays. We all get together on Christmas, all the family. And we were the only Adventists. Me and Albert and the kids were the only Adventists among them. And my mom was drinking pretty heavy even then. And she met and married a guy, Harold, who worked at the mental institution. And that didn't work out, but they were married for a while. So that's the setting of how the backdrop of the boy's life. And Seddon got involved in football when he got into junior high. Somewhat in elementary school, I think, too, but junior high, too. And Law did, too, of course. And Law was getting big. He was growing to be a big boy. So they were growing up. And, of course, when Gary and Jody moved up, they were only there for a while, just a little while. And then they divorced. They separated. Gary couldn't make much. Gary had got a job at the same place Mom worked at, Eastern Oregon Mental Health, out there at that institution. And it was terrible for him, and it didn't pay much, and it was just nightmarish. And so, of course, he went back to Las Vegas. Now, let me pause here to say to you that I didn't blame him. Life was a lot easier in Las Vegas. It always had been. It was a 24-hour town. You could always get a job there, and there was always money there. Always money. Gary could always get a job and make money, pretty good money. And that's why, even when the boys, from the time that we moved out to Mackay Acres, in the summertime, when we got our vacations, we would take the boys and we'd go down to Las Vegas. They would, a lot of times, we'd leave them in Ely a lot of times because artists wanted them to be there to visit all their cousins, which they didn't even know and could care less. But they went to Las Vegas a lot. Artists and Bob had a place down in Logandale too, so the boys spent a lot of time there. But we'd go down and see it. We'd go to Gary's in Las Vegas, and I could see why Gary, he wanted to be in Las Vegas. He wanted that easy life. but also he just felt more at home in Las Vegas. Never felt at home in Oregon. Gary didn't. So they were growing up. Everybody was growing up. We didn't have the Sherry and Tom had separated long before, divorced, and she had met Melvin. He was a very nice guy, and he helped to raise Alyssa, and very sweet guy. But Sherry was working at. She worked for a long time at what's the name of that place? Tapadera. Long time, many years at Tapadera. She worked at the bar. Yeah, she was a bartender there, and worked there for years. And I was working at Harris Pine Mills. Gary was working, or Albert was working at Harris Pine Mills. My mom and Harold just divorced. She was sinking deeper and deeper into drinking, and everybody, it was just hard on everybody. Her drinking, but of course she missed Dad, and she just didn't do well after Dad left her. So that is how life was there at Mackay Acres. And it was wonderful. It was a wonderful time of our lives. I would say the Lord blessed us abundantly, even though I didn't know it at the time, because they got the chance to grow up there. And it was our household, I would say. Albert and I fought, but I think we both made an attempt not to fight in front of the kids. And besides that, I think we liked to have fun and we liked to laugh. And they got to basically do what they wanted to do. I mean, what is it going to hurt anybody? When we weren't in town, but I let them do what they wanted to do. My philosophy was, if you know that your parents love you, you don't really need the discipline. That was my thought, right? Albert was a more person that would discipline. But that is how their lives, and my life and Albert's, passed for 11 years. The 11 years that we were out there. We moved out of there at the end of 1983. Law by then was 15 and pretty set in his ways. He had a strong will. And Sudden was about 12 when we moved. We moved into town, and Law was rebellious, and he was running around doing what he wanted to do. But they were both in football, and let's see. About this time, we bought a house in town, and Albert and I were both working, both had these management jobs. I got into management because, again, I was an Adventist. I was a credit manager there for a while. Not because of me, but Harris Pine Mills was doing very badly. And let's see, they went bankrupt. Now, Harris Pine Mills was a big employer in Pendleton, one of the bigger employers in Pendleton. Besides that, they had all these, they supported all these students all over the United States going to these academies. All the branches were in the bankruptcy. If they went bankrupt, the church owned it, they went bankrupt. Before it went bankrupt, I had this argument with my boss and quit my job. So I was without a job. We were buying that home. And then Albert lost his job because they went bankrupt. So I consider that to be a really, really bad, hard time in our lives. And Sudden really did suffer the most. The boys, Law was still there, and he was running around. He didn't pay too much attention to it, but Chance just had a really hard time with it. He'd been sent away to Adventist boarding school. He didn't do well there, so he came home. He was in high school, and he was okay, but it was hard on Sudden when we moved, when we were having all these problems. And of course we decided, so what are you going to do? We had moved over to Portland. Albert had been assigned to run one of the branches there. We were only there for a little while, and then that's when Harris went bankrupt. And so we had been there maybe about a year and a half, and he was without a job, and I was without a job. So we briefly moved back to Pendleton, and Sudden at that time he was just kind of adrift, and it was our fault. He was adrift. He was running around with his friends, but he was just adrift. And what was Law doing? I'm trying to think. Oh, Chance moved down to San Diego. When Chance turned 18, he moved down to San Diego right away. Or not San Diego, but somewhere close to LA. And then later he moved to San Diego. And he was going to go down there and get into, I don't know, what he did get into was 3D animation right away. So he wanted Law to come down there. So, of course, Law went. And Law and Chance lived, I think they lived together, and Law worked for Chance in this 3D animation. And Chance made some money. He did. Sometimes he made really good money. But anyway, they were living down there, and they moved to San Diego, and then they wanted Sudden to come down to San Diego. So Sudden was probably, I don't know, maybe 18, 19 when he went down there to San Diego to stay with him. So all three of them were down there in San Diego at one point. And Albert and I moved to Las Vegas, moved away, we left Pendleton. We left that beautiful place. We sold that place, our place at Mackay, a place with all those beautiful memories. It was just a wonderful place to raise the kids. And I was, even then, even though I wasn't a Christian, I guess I would have said I was, but I wasn't. I realized how much we were just blessed out there with those beautiful fields and the wild geese that you could hear from the reservoir every night in the fall. And just the beautiful mountains you could see out there. And our own little place with all the beautiful memories of raising the kids and all the dogs and all the fun at the reservoir and all the fishing and the families around there and playing football on the front lawn and boys. And that was behind us. And we had to sell that place. We moved and ended up moving back to Las Vegas. Hadn't been there for 20 years. But we knew Gary was there, and we knew it was easy to get a job there. It was easy living. But that ended when they went bankrupt. Many people lost their jobs, but also many people quit going to Adventist church. Many people had only been going there since they had jobs there. So the Adventist community, as far as I know, I think it kind of collapsed there in Pendleton when that happened. There's still the Adventist church there, there's still Adventists there, but not nearly the presence that there was years and years ago. We, at that time, because we moved to Las Vegas and because of Gary's influence, the boys were in San Diego, they were out of the home, and because of Gary's influence, Albert started realizing, I already sensed it. He started realizing it was hard for him because he'd lost, he had everything there. That was who he is. He was his image, his career. He'd achieved so much there. He'd been promoted, and he was the head of this whole division, and he lost all of that. He lost that image of who he was, and on top of that, he lost his faith in Adventism because it was wrong, number one, but also because Gary showed him the truth of in the Bible about that it was very unbiblical. Adventism is certainly a cult. So that was what he lost, much more than I did, much more. And we moved to Las Vegas. Kids were in San Diego then. They were in their late teens in San Diego. I don't think Sun liked it at all. I think Law loved it. Law loved it, I think, in San Diego. And Chance was just kind of working toward making lots of money and learning 3D animation, and so they did okay down there.